the time about what we're not doing or what we are doing.
And now we're live, Senators.
Okay, we are live. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, committee. Good morning, members of the public. We're going to spend the next hour or so, 50 minutes, talking about ADUs. There's a new version we're trying to get posted on our site. I don't know if it's up yet. Our drafts person is unavailable right now, but I assume we have Chris Cochran and Jacob with us from the administration. This is not necessarily their proposal or supported by them, but I think they're familiar with it. And I asked Chris if you have received Ellen's latest draft. I think it's section 20 of the bill.
Yeah, we just got it, but we haven't had much time to study it. So we may offer more thoughtful comments tomorrow, but we're happy to have this discussion.
Okay, great. I'm sorry that our council had a conflict so that she can walk through it. Essentially, what I've attempted to do here is put together various pieces that we've talked about how we can implement greater, quicker, less expensive implementations of ADU as a concept to promote more units of housing quicker in a less expensive fashion. And what's going to need to happen here is not only talk about the words, but also talk about the money at some point. There's going to be a fair amount of money in this bill, and we will have to decide how much money goes to what targeted projects or populations, and then hopefully we can get some buy-in from the appropriators down the hall, so to speak, as to how much of that will go into ADUs. So to help us along, it would be good if Scott could pull up section 20 of the latest version of the bill and share that screen. And if Scott still hasn't received the version, we have a little bit of a glitch.
I still have 3.1. I don't have 4.1 yet, Senator, but I can show 3.1 at the moment if you'd like.
Let's.
No, it's not helpful, sadly. I don't think. I can quickly email you Michael's email that has the attachment.
Perfect.
How about that? Here you go.
That's weird because I mailed it to everybody on Senate Economic Development, which should include Scott.
Yeah.
I'll double check with IT too to make sure I'm on that distribution list.
We'll see how speedy the email is from Woodstock to the northern portions of the state.
I have it here, Senator. I can.
Okay, that's it. That's 4.1. And if you can post that, I mean, if you can share that, and we'll go down. It's quite a bit ways down. It's section 20.
No worries. I will post it and share my screen here in just a second. And let me just open it up.
Oh, you're whiz. That's great. Thanks.
So just to set the stage for Chris and Jacob, again, what I've attempted to do here is to centralize at the state level some helpful assistance to promoting the development of ADUs, as opposed to just dealing with technical changes that might facilitate it and maybe putting out grant money to individuals or towns try and, I think what we heard from the national broadcast and from what we've seen in some states out west is that this is a very significant tool to quick development of additional units. And the idea is to jumpstart it with money and centralized program to where people could go and get the expertise and financing to take their garage or their basement or their house and start seriously thinking about uh, uh, building an ADU. Not dissimilar to what we were talking about with VHIP and the revolving loan program by having money out there to convert, blighted properties quickly into additional units. So we now have up on the screen the latest draft, unproofed draft, at least by the committee at this point, of this. But we want to scroll all the way down to the end, Scott.
Section 20A or 20 to section 20, and I'm the iPad doesn't have page numbers, but it's
Page 42, it looks like.
page 42. Thanks.
Okay. This looks like we're okay. Section 20A.
If you go back up to 20, that's the first change is in section 20, 4414. Yeah, great.
Okay.
There's
Chris, can you come online and just, this is really not the section I was talking about, but you can talk about this section. And then we'll go to the central office concept.
Yeah, I can talk briefly. I'm Chris Cochran for the Department of Housing and Community Development. These are changes to Chapter 117 to ease parking regulations around ADUs. It is often cited as a barrier. While ADUs are by right, municipalities often say, well, you need 3 or 4 car spaces to allow the ADUs. So this looks at different options and ties the amount of parking to the number of bedrooms. I think, I don't know, Jacob, you do zoning more than I do. I'm kind of going to pass the stick to you. Any thoughts or initial, because we just saw this. So
it's okay. We'll have more time on it. This, I think, was this part of the bill prior, and it seems like for a town to require more than 1 parking space per bedroom seems like almost like a conscious choice to limit the development of ADUs. It seems like this should be more than enough for parking. I don't know, Jacob, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Senator Sorokin and committee members. For the record, I'm Jay Kemrick. I'm a planning policy manager in the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. Some of my experience with this topic comes as development review planner, zoning administrator, and planning and economic development director working in Vermont for a decade now. And I've also served as a volunteer planning commissioner in my community. Yeah, some of the feedback we've heard about parking for accessory dwelling units is that they can be very small units, sometimes just a studio over a garage, but there are municipal parking requirements of 2 parking spaces per unit, requiring parking that isn't necessarily needed or wanted. And so this would establish, as I'm reading it, a new statewide minimum to say that no accessory dwelling unit should have more than, or no municipal bylaw should require more than 1 parking space per bedroom for an accessory dwelling unit. It's interesting though that Legislative Council chose to put this in this section versus the statewide ADU language in section 4412.
So you're suggesting that it may be moved to an, you're supportive of this language, but it may need to move to a different location?
But I'm not sure if I can take a position on that, but I do, my take as a professional planner is that it would appear, this language, I believe, would make it easier to build accessory dwelling units.
So,
In what section?
Senator Clarkson, could you please raise your hand?
Sorry. Can you see me?
I can see you, yes.
Sorry, Jacob, Jake, what section did you say it was more appropriate in?
The rest of the ADU language is in section 4412 of chapter 117. It's the section on required provisions and prohibited effects of municipal bylaws. That's where all the ADU language is housed right now.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So was this language in the House Bill of 511?
No.
No.
This is new language. We've talked for many years about how excessive parking requirements can be a barrier to ADU production, but this is a new take on it that we have not seen before.
Okay. Other than local control, Chris, could you see a reason, a likely reason why certain ADUs would require more than one parking space per bedroom?
I to open this can of worms, yeah, perhaps if they were a short-term rental and there were a lot of people staying there, that's the only thing I could imagine.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the bigger section. Okay. This is a figure that I came up with. It's sort of a conglomeration of needs in the rest of the bill, but certainly we need to peel back the onion on this number. But let's see. This is hard without our counsel here. Let's see. So the first section, and we all can read it, but I'd ask Chris and Jacob by default. You're not without our counsel here as to any kind of, and I understand you want to reserve judgment on all of this, but if you could look at this and say in your experience how this might help in the development of ADUs to have sort of turnkey floor plans and designs available to homeowners.
Yeah, Chris Cochran for the department quickly. Obviously this is not in the governor's budget. So that's, when Commissioner Hanford speaks with you guys later today, I think you're going to want to get his input on this section as well as the other new investments in housing.
Well, let's back up on that because you're familiar with S79 and S210, and in the VHIP plant wording that has not yet been enacted into law, there's millions of dollars for VHIP, and it quickly says, and for the development of ADUs, which we understand there's just only one that has gone forward, despite the fact that I guess hundreds of units have been developed under VHIP, but ADUs are indeed a subset of that VHIP program, correct?
I believe that is correct. It's allowed through VHIP. I think it just was unclear to me if this was additional appropriation or a carve out of VHIP.
Aha, the $64,000 question.
Yes.
We'll let you know.
Okay.
Does,
Uh, Senator Clarkson.
does, does that, decision affect your support?
The party line is if it's not in the governor's budget, or, I can't support it. So,
But I believe this was in a discussion with all of us that navigators of the import, and maybe it was Trevor, but the importance of having people to help navigate all the permits, people who aren't used to building. These are not developers, people who just own a house and want to develop an ADU. And towns don't necessarily have that expertise
No.
to provide as a resource. And so I believe it was in one of our committee discussions with many of you present, many members of the administration, that this idea was developed, and I may be wrong.
no,
but
I think if you want to separate the policy about what's, we had a high level conversation about if we
Right.
wanted to start ADU production, jumpstart ADU production in the state,
Right.
what are the pieces that are missing?
Right.
There's obviously, a state leadership that's needed.
Right.
We talked about municipal engagement that is needed. People need a lot of hands-on assistance because these are not developers, these are homeowners. So they need help with the permitting process. They need help with financing. So these kind of the subsequent elements of it kind of address kind of those high level things that we talked about. If you were to do this, what are some key pieces that would be necessary to make this happen? Yes, and we did have that conversation, but I'm just getting down into the minutia of like, was it in the governor's budget or not?
Right.
To that question, we always have to say no, and everybody understands why.
Yes, but in some ways, I think it's unclear what is in the governor's budget for ADUs.
Right.
So we may have to flesh that out and say, when you propose $20 million for VHIP, were you planning on spending any money on ADUs? And was it supposed to be under the same guidelines as S79 in terms of matching funds? Or can some of these ideas be used out of that $20 million? Or are ADUs a poor stepchild to helping landlords fix up blighted property? And that, ADUs and these ideas, are they at the back of the bus? Can we do some of this now, or do we have to wait to see what the take up is on VHIP dilapidated, blighted apartments? Or are these an equal partner, and can we carve out a certain amount of money? So yes, you're seeing this for the first time, but we need to have a discussion pretty soon of how to craft it so that ADUs can get some of that money, or maybe we appropriate more money from for housing or from elsewhere in the budget to do this. But I think you're hearing that this is pretty important to this committee anyhow.
No.
To get this done.
And we want to be supportive of this. I believe, for many Vermont communities, as you've heard in testimony and in the White House presentation, that we're overhoused. Many seniors live in very large buildings, and this is a great opportunity to create some housing options that maybe have fewer permitting barriers because you're not building on raw land. Presumably, these are occurring, and this is a question for the committee, in designated centers with sewer and water service, or are they happening, across, in any location? I think, do you want to target these in any way to areas where we're trying to create more housing opportunities close to shopping, schools, work, amenities, and the like?
So let's get through these if we can fairly quickly, because I do want to start a conversation that I know you are familiar with on the issue of owner occupied, and we're going to have to make a decision this week on whether we want to change Vermont's law and what can of worms that may open up for us on that issue. So we did one. Can you just briefly walk us through? You see the only like 7 lines, and just get the administration and Jacob's.
Yeah, so I can try to pinch hit. Subsection 1 proposes hiring a consultant to develop an ADU guidebook. I think we commonly call these like lookbooks to help inspire, and captivate people like, yes, you can do this, and here are some opportunities. I think it's an important element to help homeowners, spark their imagination and get them to consider this. Section 2 or subsection 2 proposes ambassadors. These would be municipal, support people, as you heard from testimony in, Waitsfield, Montpelier, Brattleboro, that these local people to assist were critical to the success of the program. So it checks that box. Subsection 3 proposes a state, I guess, a DHCD centered resource centers to support these pilot communities. So you've got, a state level leadership and then local communities, these, I presume, pilot communities, but I don't know how many communities you're looking at targeting, to support these local efforts and coordinate and steer when issues come up. The state can often provide assistance and support. Subsection 4 proposes to work with VHFA on financing. It creates a down payment assistance grant for homeowners, and it creates a loan loss reserve fund. This will help with financing. Many people may be house rich, but bank book poor, and this would help these people, I think, create opportunities where they maybe don't look as bankable as an other person. And then, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. The last section, subsection 6, creates a social enterprise program for weatherization and an internal conversion, and considers workforce issues related to this. Obviously, we're going to need, putting the money out there really helps with a lot of the financing challenges that you heard were a barrier to ADU production, but we're also going to need people to show up and do the work. So it'll be critical to train a workforce to be able to do this. And I think it's consistent with your vision, like, how do we stand this up quickly, kind of build this network? And I think the analogy that you heard was like this, the solar developers, stand it up, figure it out, and then create, a constituency that can sustain this over the long term. So use the state government and local governments to figure out how to work, and then over time, make these more turnkey, so that the private sector can step in and sustain these over the longer term.
Thank you, Chris. I realize I put you on the spot here. That's a good starting point. I have a couple of questions. How do you, in terms of 2 and 3, if we gave grant money out to certain municipalities to have somebody in the planning office devoted to helping move these projects along, how does that differ from the statewide thing, and do we need both?
I do think you need both. Really, as I don't know what the time frame is on this, but kind of, I look to the model of our Zoning for Great Neighborhoods program to maybe inspire some of the thinking around this. It took state partners, all of our housing partners working together to do the top level messaging and provide the resources to really make it easier for the municipalities to take the next step. So much of this work requires, physical site visits to the building, relationships with the homeowner, assisting them with the things that come up. If that was totally run out of a state office, there would be a lot of back and forth. It would take a whole lot of staff time just to kind of provide the resources, the hands-on resources that people are going to need to kind of make these things happen. So I think state level leadership on kind of how you make it happen, make it as turnkey as possible, and then working through partnerships with the municipalities to provide that one-on-one assistance to the homeowners to get it financed, to get it permitted, to get them the contractors, just to, what works is easy. And unless it's really turnkey, unless we're providing a lot of support and services to make it easier for a homeowner, I don't think you're going to get the outcomes you want.
Okay. And on number one, is that something that, I don't know whether we have to pay a consultant for, or are there guidebooks from other states which can be quickly adopted?
Yeah, I think there are some standard ideas out there, but I think so much of the activity's been on kind of West Coast building types. I think they could certainly be inspired, but there's some really great firms, and this is something that we could work with our partners, AARP. I think they have consultants on retainer who do a lot of work on kind of capturing people's imagination. What do these things look like? But they have to be in the Vermont format, in Vermont vernacular. We can't really show examples of, Adobe conversions. We need Vermont type building types. So carriage houses, farmhouses with L's, things like that. I think it needs to be tailored to this community or to the state to get people to respond to it.
Okay. So we're going to have Josh in later this morning and we'll talk to him about this. But, I think what we're trying to do here is, we've got this, we don't have a law in place for VHIP yet. The administration has proposed overall, I think, $32 million over time for VHIP, and buried in the VHIP language, which has some parameters, is the word "and accessory dwelling units." So, we're going to need to hear from Josh. If that were to pass in isolation, what would his ADU program look like? We're trying to put some very limited meat on the bone here, but there's supposed to be some attention being paid to ADU with all those monies. What could he point us, or could you point us now, what the nonprofit community is governed by in terms of the development of an ADU? How much is the grant? What is the matching requirement? What help is going out? I mean, I think we have more details on the conversion of the blighted, not up to code properties, how that money's going out. But if somebody came to the nonprofit, then ultimately you govern some of the guidelines that they impose, what to do an ADU, what would the homeowner be told?
Yeah. Do you want me to respond to that, or Senator Clarkson?
Yeah, I kind of do. I know it's a rhetorical question, but I mean, what is out there right now for an ADU?
I'm a little disconnected from the VHIP program. Really, it's Sean Gilpin and Commissioner Hanford who kind of probably have to respond most about that. But from what I understand, that being said, I think it's largely envisioned as sub grants to the regional housing, the neighbor works groups that are providing the assistance and supporting services to help improve those units and get them back online. I think what's envisioned here is a little different from that. So I think those these two visions of what a more targeted ADU program would look like and how that jives with their model of how they're planning to disperse these fundings. I think it's a question that needs to be answered.
Okay. So it sounds to me, I'll get to you in a second, Senator Clutch. It sounds to me like this is what's put down here is a little bit more robust and state-centered, where and there may not be any real definition out there right now to the nonprofits as to how much they can give out, or how they're going to help people along. I think that we're dealing with somewhat of a different situation. It's converting existing housing stock. One may be blighted, one may not be, into extra units. But I think the ownership in some way of the people that are being helped, being a landlord versus a homeowner might be different levels of sophistication and different places in the process. So, okay, Senator Clarkson.
Thanks. I have a couple thoughts. One is, I think Vermonters, ever since we went through the exchange and healthcare, I think Vermonters understand the word navigator. I would use the word navigator all the way through this instead of ambassadors. And I think you're absolutely right. This is a natural growth out of VHIP and adding on to. And I think our 5 housing partners around the state would be great to have navigators based in, and they know the region best. They could design a navigator per X number of towns or whatever, because I think you're absolutely right. Unlike the VHIP program where you're working with experienced landlords who know a lot of the ropes and what they're doing, this is with a whole bunch of new people who've never done this before. But I think it makes absolute sense to partner with our housing partners to embed those navigators with them. They know the towns. They could create, one navigator per X number of towns and do this work. I think this is going to be essential to the success of this program.
Thank you. I tend to agree. I mean, I think this got the discussion started, and we'll hear from Josh. And over the next few days, we'll try not to put too many constraints on this. But I think you're right. It's better done at the local level, at least in helping people, individuals, walk through the process and get their grants and convert their housing.
Right.
So.
The only thing statewide that I think would be really useful is, of course, the guidebook and the ultimate coordination with the 5 housing partners. Obviously, that's a key piece.
Okay, good. So we have about 10 or 15 minutes left on ADUs this morning. Can you, Jacob or Chris, help us get us started again on the owner-occupied situation, what the pros and cons are, and where the law is right now in the state of Vermont? I think it's complicated in terms of, you get an ADU built right now, and then you want to, rent your house out to somebody. What happens to the leniency that we gave to the development of the ADU? Can a town say you can't have that unit anymore? It's very confusing, but I could use your help.
Yeah, Jacob, are you comfortable trying to field this one? I can probably step in, but I think you've thought about this more than I have.
Yeah, sure. I'll kick it off. So let's just to get grounded in the definition of accessory dwelling unit. It's a unit located on an owner-occupied lot that is either within or it's a detached structure to a single-family dwelling use. So you have a single-family home. One of the units must be owner-occupied on the lot. That's the way the ADU statute set up in 4412 right now. I think, and what happens if it doesn't? If it's not owner-occupied, well, that would be generally a permit violation. And what you heard from some of the earlier testimony is that this can cause problems when, as soon as a home goes into foreclosure and it has this, and it's owned by a corporation or a banking institution, it can't be owner occupied. So there are some interesting scenarios like that. But the intent of the bill, as I understand it, is that it was to open up new housing opportunities in a limited way to single family homeowners who live on the lot. The trade-off is that it's a very limited product in the marketplace for somebody that's looking to own a primary dwelling with a rental property, and so it's not going to attract an investor landlord. in quite the same way that would just want to own rental properties in their portfolio.
And I believe there was concerns, or from what we saw from the White House presentation, that financing gets the banks will not finance on these because they're like, oh, there's an owner occupancy requirement that we can't underwrite on that. So removing the owner occupancy requirement potentially gets the banks better engaged. And I think it was Eli Spavik that said, ADUs are kind of a unique, understanding the concern, especially of Senator Clarkson about, the person being rooted in the community, but we don't treat any other housing type like this. Somebody can buy a home and rent it. And we are providing a different kind of lens and, maybe not the most equitable approach to ADUs, especially when we're trying to create more opportunities for people to live in these, typically amenity-rich neighborhoods.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, yes, Senator Clarkson.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think if it's not owner occupied, it's just landlord. It's just more housing. I don't agree. Every house in Woodstock that has a mother-in-law apartment, as they were always called, sells like hotcakes because it creates an opportunity for people who need that additional income to help pay the mortgage. There have been no financing problems with selling a house with a mother-in-law apartment. They are in big demand because they also help you continue to finance your home. So I would argue that it does change the nature of a neighborhood to not have an owner occupied unit. It just becomes another landlord, absent landlord. And I, for one, would not support that. I mean, I think these are different. And I think we are supporting density within our downtowns. That's our objective here. My objective is to not create more commercial landlord situations. My objective is to create more housing using people's biggest asset, which is their home usually, and creating another opportunity for them to stay there longer, or create an opportunity for them to afford to continue to stay in places like Woodstock that are now unaffordable for normal people.
So my question for the department is, if we got rid of the owner occupied requirement in Vermont law, how would these units be different than asking to permit for a duplex?
It certainly blurs the line. That's my initial response. But Jacob, do you recall that table that you put together?
Yes, it would be a little bit more flexible than a duplex without an owner occupancy requirement, in that a duplex tends to require a shared wall in a single structure, whereas an ADU could allow two separate units on a lot. But it would kind of start to look and behave very similarly to a duplex at that point.
Okay. And I assume part of the reason we have our ADU law is to allow for more housing in zones that might not allow for duplexes.
Yes.
That was the origin, I think, originally. So, but we heard in the White House presentation that they thought that, and the experts in ADU nationally seem to think that this is a big restriction on the development of ADUs to have the owner occupied requirement. Is there some middle ground here that we could pass?
Can we take a rain check on that and think about it and come back?
Call a friend? Okay.
Yes.
I mean, I think there's arguments on both
Yeah.
sides. I mean, we want to develop more housing, but we just don't want to. I don't know that Senator Clarkson raised some good points. Some of us might not be all that anxious to change the zoning in every town to essentially allow for duplexes. So that's the tension I think we're feeling here. But interesting question. It seems to me there might be some sort of compromise position here in terms of length of stay or something, I don't know, that we could come up with.
Mr. Chair, may I ask another question?
Please.
I'd love to, I mean, the data, the anecdotal thoughts are always that if it's owner occupied, it's often better maintained. There's an investment of the owner in the property that, you know, in terms of how it looks and how it's taken care of. The owner is the bond to the community. The owner is you know, the person who's been, you know, a community member and would introduce and incorporate and weave in the new person or family that moved into the ADU or into the larger part of the house. So, you know, there are a lot of social positive pieces here that are, and possibly community positive, I mean, and community positive pieces here. I'd love to know if we have any data about the difference of maintenance between owner occupied rental units and rental units at large.
The best VHFA has the most data on housing, but I don't think it's granular enough to like say, you know, owner occupied is better maintained versus, you know, out of state.
Yeah, but
property
that's a piece of this discussion,
Mhm.
you know, and a piece of other discussions that we've had about owner
Right,
occupied.
but you know, we often make policy I jokingly call it by hearsay. I don't know if that's true. It feels like it's logical, but I don't know. Jacob,
I know,
you wanted to-
that's why I asked if you had data on it.
Jacob?
I would add, I haven't seen any data on, you know, the number of duplexes that are owner occupied or that have been condominiumized and are fully owned versus those that are owned by landlords. Because as Chris noted, the ADU is the only housing type that that we regulate based on owner occupancy. And you go to a duplex and it could be owned by a landlord. Both units could be owned and rented. Both units could be owned. One unit could be owner occupied. And you know, and I'm familiar just in my own neighborhood of all three scenarios, just like that. And that was a point that Eli Spivak made in that in his presentation about that stood out to me is that they were allowing the conveyance of accessory dwelling units for ownership and equity building. So there are models based on what he's seeing on the West Coast where even allowing an ADU still allows for an ownership opportunity, equity building opportunity based on how it's structured.
Okay, well,
Chair, may I throw something in?
Senator Brock, please.
Yeah, I'm concerned that one of the things that we seem to increasingly be trying to do is to become the zoning board for every municipality in the state, which I don't think is a particularly wise thing to do. I think your notion of perhaps finding a middle ground might be appropriate. And one of those places to look at a middle ground is to look at local zoning boards and local planners to look for the end result that we might want to achieve, which is increasing the number of housing units, and then have them come up with a plan to do that. And that plan will differ depending upon the municipality. But this one size fits all, I find very concerning.
I think that I hear what you're saying, but I think the problem with that is they probably already have the power to do that. And we need to nudge them in a direction to either the default position is that they can do the ADUs or come up with some reason why they're unique that they shouldn't be. I mean, you're right. I mean, a lot of this housing bill is about imposing, I guess, requirements on towns that they try and improve density. They don't have exclusive housing, you know, the infill housing, all of that. Probably a lot of sections of this bill can make the same argument, but you're also right that there may be some sweet spots here where we don't have to have the heavy hand of the state, but we have to have encouragement. And I think that's part of the reason, the whole thing with priority housing, where we exempt people from Act 250, if they're doing X, Y, and Z, we'll let them have denser, or require them to have denser housing.
Well,
But I
the
think,
is the end result that you're trying to achieve. If the end result is a greater number of housing units within a particular area, you can charge a municipality with figuring out how to do that. You can set some standard as to what the end result ought to be, but allow them to use their judgment as to how to get there based on the particularities of their municipality, rather than mandating it from a statewide standpoint, which is what we seem to be moving toward.
well, fair enough. So I think what you're saying, one size might not fit all, but you're in agreement that there should be a standard that they ultimately have to meet. How they get there would be their choice. And, that may be
Well, I think
acceptable.
that's
We-
as
We
far as I'm
cannot,
willing to
yeah,
go.
okay,
It's not that I particularly like that either, but I recognize that we need additional housing. Now, whether it's stuffing all of that housing into narrowly defined areas based on what we believe to be good housing policy, I think that's a question, obviously, that's open for discussion. But it
Yep.
seems the General Assembly has already discussed that and has landed in that position. And what I'm suggesting is, well, there may be ways to get there that are not as oppressive as what we're trying to do in this bill.
so we had the same discussion 20 years ago when we did ADUs. I mean, it probably was said, and I think it was said, let us go on our own and we'll figure out a way how to expand housing. And the legislature decided, well, there should be some minimum standards that all towns have to abide by that will allow for the development of ADUs. And where we are 20 years later now is, and I've said this over and over again, we could keep throwing money at the problem, and that could be the sweetener to let towns do it. But we could also change some land use policies. And one of them, the biggest one, quite frankly, here that we have to decide is this question of owner occupancy. And I'm not sure I'm there yet in terms of giving up on that, but that would certainly, as the national experts have said it, if you say that an ADU doesn't have to be owner occupied anymore, then that's going to open up a lot more housing in a lot more districts. I think
Yes,
we
it will. I think there's no question about that. But it also, I'm just concerned about the micromanagement of defining parking spaces for places in Burlington versus places in East Overshoe.
Right.
Is that the state's job to do that?
Yep. Okay. All right.
Mr.
So we're,
Chair?
we're gonna take Senator Clark. You could
May
go
I
ahead.
just
Bud. We're gonna take a 10-minute break and go on to
May
other.
may I just ask a quick question?
Yep.
So, I mean, and as I think about sort of what a middle ground might be, I'd leave it as it is and put in a review after 3 or 4 years, see how it's doing, see if we need to make that change. I think let's make these changes. Let's see how much it actually incents, in terms of additional ADUs, and then revisit it. And if it's a problem, let's do something about it. But I think for us to make all these changes with ADUs, let's see what success we have with our current law and build in a review.
Okay.
Well, my concern is we don't want to adopt a policy that says we will torture you for 3 years and then we will review whether or not the torture is too onerous and then fix it later. My sense is we should fix it on the front end.
Well, I just got a text from a realtor here in Woodstock who says they're a huge asset. I said, because of the income stream for people buying a property, I asked about mother-in-law apartments. She said they're a huge asset, particularly post-COVID, income stream and/or a place for long-term visitors.
Mhm.
So there doesn't seem to be a financing problem for buying houses with mother-in-law apartments.
Chris.
Yeah, I mean,
Question and
just well, maybe a possible middle ground to just see what happens. Depending on how you design, your local delivery mechanism and how if you choose to prioritize these to certain municipalities or you go statewide, but if you choose to narrow them to certain communities, one of your criteria could be, if you want to compete for, this ADU program or this money, some things to consider are, have you changed your bylaws? Do you allow, do you require owner occupancy, or would you consider removing owner occupancy as a requirement? And then you would be able to compare the difference in two communities. And then this maybe gets at Senator Brock's concern about where we wouldn't be mandating it, but it's a consideration as a source of funding. So the typical, here's an incentive. We'd like to see what this looks like. Is your community interested in trying this?
Yeah,
So
except
I think we need to move on. So let's meet at 11:10, 13 minutes from now, and we'll pick up other sections